Let's give her a round of applause. And it's great to be at the Freedom Summit today. Ladies and gentlemen, on a serious note, we are a nation at risk. President Biden's presidency has been a disaster. And yes, his leadership has been as unsteady as his walk along the beach. Biden's economic plan has made it hard for families to make ends meet. Biden's open-door policies have threatened our security. His all-green energy plan has undermined our economy, and his weakness abroad has emboldened our enemies. Our economy is struggling. Nations are at war, and the United States leadership is threatened. My friends, it is time for a new direction. It is time for Republican leadership. I am running for President of the United States because we are a nation at risk, and I am the right leader for these perilous times. Many of you know my story. As a federal prosecutor, I put on a flak jacket to help negotiate the surrender of an armed encampment of terrorists. I successfully prosecuted them in court despite threats and assassination plots. As a member of Congress, I served with great members from Florida, such as now Chief Justice Charles Kennedy, who is on the Judiciary Committee with me. And guess what we did in Congress 20 years ago? We actually balanced the budget. I know how to do it. And it's been a long time since we've been able to do it. I was also a prosecutor of former President Clinton when he was charged with obstruction of justice, and I went to the Senate to try that case. I also served in the Bush administration as former administrator of the DEA. So I understand the fentanyl crisis that we face, and I know how to work with other nations to go after the supply of deadly drugs and to dismantle the cartels. And then I was in charge of border security in the Bush administration. And I will tell you that we didn't get it perfect, but it looks perfect compared to what has happened in the Biden administration. I understand the threat, and I understand what needs to be done. I had to set up the first visa security office in Saudi Arabia. I negotiated with the European Commission on security agreements post 9/11. And I worked to protect America from a terrorist attack after the World Trade Center attack in our country. But one of the highlights of my public career is that I was able to serve as governor of Arkansas for 8 years. And during that time, I proved that you can govern as a conservative. After more than 100 years of Democratic rule in the state, let me repeat that. 100 years of Democratic rule in the state, I signed legislation to lower taxes from 7% down to 4.9%. $700 million a year going from the government coffers back to taxpayers' pockets. I reduced the regulatory burden on our businesses, and we worked to shrink the size of state government, and guess what? I left a $2 billion surplus for my successor, Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And while governor, I followed a simple principle that I will also follow as president. I wanted the private sector of our economy to grow faster than the government sector, and it did. I reduced state government employment by 14%, 3,000 fewer workers, and the private sector created more than 100,000 jobs. I protected women's sports by signing a law that said biological men cannot compete in women's sports. And let me assure you, as president, I would sign a law that prohibited permanent change in the gender of our children. I know one of the debates today is about restrictions on abortion. As governor, I signed over 30 pro-life bills that led Arkansas to be recognized as the most pro-life state in the nation. I will be a pro-life president. And during the pandemic, I worked to open schools and businesses, not to close them down. In fact, Arkansas ranked number 2 in the nation in terms of days of in-classroom instruction during the pandemic, second only to Wyoming. And that was good for our school children. I didn't shelter in place, and I did not categorize some businesses as non-essential, because in my view, if a business provides a job for a family, it is essential. There is no one running for president with the depth of experience I have on the toughest issues facing our country. The number one issue Americans face continues to be the economy and how their paychecks have been eroded by Biden's inflation and high interest rates. I grew up on the farm, worked in factories, lived in a mobile home, and struggled to make ends meet. Today, our families are struggling, and I will balance the budget, fix the economy, and help our families. That's what Republican leadership will do. And as president, I will unleash energy production in the United States of America. We don't want our president going to Saudi Arabia and saying, "Can you please produce more oil?" We're going to produce energy in this country, and we're going to be energy independent and dominant. And let me tell you, I will support Israel. And I will not push back on Israel as they go after Hamas. What President Biden has done in asking for a pause is putting Israel in a weakened position, and it is wrong. I will strengthen our military, support our veterans. By the way, I love Pensacola. My sister taught at Pensacola Christian Academy, and my brother was married there. Florida not only respects our military, but you are the focal point of our national defense, from Pensacola to Tampa to Key West. Thank you, Florida. I will stand up to China. We will compete with China, and we will win. We do this militarily, economically, and technology-wise. And we do this partly by expanding computer science education in the United States, as I did in Arkansas. In Arkansas, I started out, we had 1,400 students statewide that took computer science. When I finished, we had 23,000. We have 51% of our high schools that offer computer science right now across America. I'll make it 100% so we can compete with China. When it comes to the fentanyl crisis that we have, I will make our drug czar a cabinet-level position in order to make drug abuse a priority in my administration. And I will empower the DEA as it goes after those who traffic in fentanyl and enforce the law. I will reform federal law enforcement, and it needs reforming. And you can go to asa2024.com and look at my plan, or you can make a donation. But that is my plan to reform federal law enforcement. And I will secure the border by working with our governors and not suing them in court for using a water barrier on the Rio Grande. The cartels will be public enemy number one in my administration, and the Border Patrol will have the resources they need. Now, when you evaluate the candidates, ask yourselves, who has the proven record? Who has done what they promised? And who leads in a way that not only wins the presidency, but also helps carry us to a majority in the House and Senate? I won my last election with 65% of the vote. You don't do that unless you expand the base and win independents. My team has asked me, why should I file in Florida? When you have a former president from Florida and a governor from Florida on the ballot, and when there's a winner-take-all rule for the delegates. Here is the answer to that question. If you are a serious candidate, you need to be in Florida. You have a significant number of delegates, and you will be critical in winning the general election. And second, Florida's primary comes later in time. That means you will be in a better position to decide on the candidates. Your primary comes 2 weeks after Super Tuesday and after the beginning, so it happens, beginning of March Madness. This means you will have more information and perhaps more clarity in all that is going on in the chaos of Trump world. Now, there are some that say we need to wrap this up quickly and consolidate the candidates. I, for one, believe that Florida voters should not be cut out of looking at all the candidates. Who among you today has filled out the March Madness bracket and has already picked the winner? No one. Although we have our favorites, no serious sports writer is arguing that the season should be skipped. And so let's not get in too big of a hurry. The full season must be played out in politics as well as in sports, and the voters will have the final say. Next March not only brings us March Madness, it will also we will witness our justice system at work and on trial in federal and state courtrooms. As someone who's been in the courtroom for over 25 years as a federal prosecutor and also in defending some of the most serious federal criminal cases, I can say that there is a significant likelihood that Donald Trump will be found guilty by a jury on a felony offense next year. That may or may not happen before you vote in March. And it might not make any difference to you, but it will make a difference for our chances to attract independent voters in November. It will make a difference for those down ticket races for Congress and Senate, and it will weaken the GOP for decades to come. As a party, we must support the rule of law. We cannot win as a country without integrity in the White House. And while some will ignore the destructive behavior of the former president, I assure you we ignore it at our own peril. The next generation will not look favorably back on this time. On this day, 43 years ago, November 4, 1980, Ronald Reagan was elected to be the 40th President of the United States. Reagan beat an incumbent president during a time in which there was great uncertainty at home and abroad. The years before, on that election day, the U.S. Embassy in Tehran was stormed and 52 American hostages were taken by force and held captive for 444 days. High inflation and high interest rates threatened the American dream. The man occupying the Oval Office on that day seemed overwhelmed by the job and eclipsed by the times. Does this sound familiar? Between today and the end of March, Republican voters across the country must make new choices to give us the right leader for the GOP. Someone who believes in the party of Lincoln and the party of Reagan. And then we need a new leader in the White House so that we can resume our march to a more perfect union. Florida must lead the way. Florida will have an incredible responsibility next year. Electing the next president will require us to put our differences in the past and we have a lot of work to do ahead of us. My Susan and I are people of faith, and we trust in the Almighty God to direct the affairs of our nation. And it is important that we put our trust in Him and we put our faith in His leadership and guidance for our country. And God knows we need His providential help today. Thank you, Florida, and may God bless America. Thank you.